Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and sorry for the late start. I was having some technical difficulties. Hope that you'll join soon. Now, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another session. Today, I want to take our discussion in a somewhat different direction because something happened in Jamaica yesterday that I believe forces us to confront a much older question, a question that did not begin yesterday and arguably did not end with independence on August 6, 1962. The question is simple: who really owns Jamaica? And when ordinary Jamaicans believe that their homes, their land, or their rights are being threatened by powerful interests, who protects them? That question brings us directly into our original topic for today: the CCJ versus Privy Council, corruption, power, and the crisis of accountability. But yesterday's events in Jamaica have given this discussion a very real and very contemporary dimension. We are hearing about homes being demolished in the early hours of the morning in Cooper's Hill, Trelawney. We're hearing questions about the ownership of the land, the involvement of a private investor, and the role of the police. And according to statements attributed to the Member of Parliament, there are questions about whether a private company interested in developing a resort was involved. Those are serious questions, and I want to be very careful here. We must distinguish between what has been established, what has been alleged, and what still needs to be answered. But there is even a bigger question that we need to ask. If a private developer has an interest in a piece of land and police officers become involved in the removal of or demolition of people's homes, under whose authority is that happening? Who authorized it? What legal process was followed? Were the occupants given due notice? Were they given an opportunity to challenge the action? And most importantly, how could the government of Jamaica and the relevant institutions not know what was taking place if the police, an arm of the state, were involved? That takes us back to history. Now, we were emancipated in 1834, but we were not given any land. When slavery ended in the British Caribbean, emancipation did not mean that formerly enslaved Jamaicans suddenly received the economic foundation necessary to become independent landowners. There is a famous phrase associated with the struggle of the formerly enslaved for economic independence: a mule and an acre of land. But what Britain actually provided was something very different. Under the abolition settlement of 1833, slave owners received enormous financial compensation for the loss of their enslaved labor. The enslaved themselves received no comparable compensation for generations of forced labor. Think about that. The people who had been treated as property were not compensated for the theft of their labor and freedom. The people who claimed ownership of them were compensated for the loss of that so-called property. And much of the land remained concentrated in the hands of the existing land-owning class. So emancipation ended one system of domination, but it did not automatically dismantle the economic structure that slavery had created. And that is why the land question becomes so important. Now, by 1865, barely 3 decades after emancipation, Jamaica exploded. The Morant Bay Rebellion was not simply a story about one confrontation between Jamaicans and the colonial authorities. It reflected deep grievances over poverty, land, political exclusion, unequal justice, and the inability of ordinary Black Jamaicans to secure meaningful economic and political power. Paul Bogle and his followers were demanding justice and representation. The colonial response was extraordinarily severe. The rebellion was crushed, hundreds of Jamaicans were killed and executed, and George William Gordon was executed after being accused of involvement. And the aftermath exposed something fundamental. Political independence cannot exist where ordinary people have no meaningful economic power and no confidence that the institutions of justice will protect them. And then came independence. Jamaica became independent on August 6, 1962. But independence did not magically solve the land question. The flag changed, the government changed, the political leadership became Jamaican, but the historical distribution of land and wealth did not suddenly disappear. And that is why, more than 6 decades after independence, land remains such a sensitive and consequential issue in Jamaica. We can see the issue in different periods of Jamaica's modern history. We can look at the financial crisis of the 1990s and the FinSAC era, when the collapse of financial institutions and the subsequent restructuring had devastating consequences for many Jamaicans, including members of the middle class. Homes and businesses were lost. Assets were sold. People who had spent years building economic security found themselves vulnerable to forces much larger than themselves. And the question remains, what happens to ordinary people when they lose economic power? There is also broader Jamaican literature examining how race, class, capital, and ownership have affected who gets ahead economically. The title Too Black to Succeed captures one aspect of that debate, the perception that race and class have continued to influence economic opportunity long after the formal end of colonial rule. And that brings us back to land, because land is not simply dirt. Land is wealth. Land is security. Land is inheritance. Land is political power. Land is the ability to build a home and leave something for your children. So when people lose land, they're not merely losing a piece of property. They can be losing their economic future and their children's and their grandchildren. So let's look at Cooper's Hill, Trelawney 2026. And now we arrive at August 11, 2026. People woke up to reports that homes have been demolished in the early hours of the morning, 3 a.m. to be specific. And suddenly, an issue that many people might have regarded as ancient history becomes immediate. Because the question is no longer simply what happened under British colonialism. The question becomes, what kind of society have we built since independence? If powerful private interests can obtain land and ordinary people can find themselves removed from property they occupy, where is the protection? If the police are involved, where is the accountability? If the government says it did not know what was happening, how does that work? And if the government did authorize the action, what process was followed? These are not anti-investment questions. Jamaica needs investment, the Caribbean needs investment, but investment cannot mean that the rights of ordinary citizens become secondary to the interests of capital. And this is where I want to introduce a provocative question. Are foreign investors becoming our new colonial masters? I am not saying that every investor is a colonial master. I am asking whether we are creating a system in which economic power becomes so concentrated that the ordinary Jamaican has less practical power over his or her own land than the investor who wants to develop it. Because if that is happening, then we have to ask ourselves, what exactly did independence change? Or what does independence mean? And this is going to lead us now to the CCJ, the Caribbean Court of Justice, or the Privy Council. And that brings us directly back to our original question. the CCJ versus the Privy Council? What should be the final court of appeal for Jamaica and the Caribbean? Does Jamaica need a Caribbean court rooted in the constitutional, social, and historical realities of Caribbean societies? Or should the final judicial authority remain with a court thousands of miles away in Britain? But there is even a deeper question that we need to reflect on. Changing the final court of appeal does not automatically create justice. A country can have a Caribbean court and still have corruption. A country can have constitutional rights and still have citizens who struggle to enforce them. A country can have elections and still have enormous concentrations of economic power. A country can have independence and still have institutions that ordinary people do not trust. So the real issue is not merely CCJ versus Privy Council. The real issue is who is accountable when power is exercised against the ordinary citizen? Who protects the homeowner? Who protects the small farmer? Who protects the person who has no political connections? Who protects the Jamaican or the Barbadian or the Trinidadian who cannot afford an army of lawyers? And if the state itself is involved, who holds the state accountable? That is the crisis of accountability. And that is why yesterday's events in Cooper's Hill are not merely about a few houses in Trelawney. They force us to confront a question that has haunted Jamaica and the Caribbean at large, from emancipation through Morant Bay, through independence, through the financial crises of the 1990s, and into the Jamaica of 2026. After all these years, who really has power over Jamaica's land? The Jamaican people, the Jamaican state, or those with the money to acquire it? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, did the struggle for independence really end on August 6, 1962, or did only one chapter of that struggle end? We must begin to reflect on these situations because we find ourselves now in a situation where our politicians are actually selling out everything to people, and people are going to be finding themselves homeless, landless, and right back in slavery of former times. Now, the Jamaican government decided that it was going to bulldoze the people's homes, right? And something that I'm trying to pull up this news article that comes up here, which we shall be exploring among other things in this afternoon's broadcast. So let me pull up this on my screen, this very important article that is telling us exactly the facts, laying the facts on the table of what took place in Jamaica in this very, very disgusting situation. Let me see if I can pull this up on the screen. I'm having a little difficulty here getting this information up. Let me get this here, and then I shall come and put it on the screen. Well, not necessarily on the screen, but get you here to get it. Give me a second. Okay, good. All right, so we're yesterday in Cooper's Hill, Jamaica, Trelawney to be specific, a parish in Jamaica. We're learning that residents woke up to a terrifying, event in which police came and bulldozed their homes. Now, the people are calling them squatters. But my question is, if the government decided, well, they're saying it's not the government, it's a private corporation, but the fact of the matter, been aware that something of that magnitude would have taken place. But it seems that the government is trying its best to stay away from that sort of debacle. Now, residents of a section of Cooper's Pen, Trelawney, were jolted from their slumber on Tuesday morning to find a demolition crew flattening their homes in a pre-dawn operation involving bulldozers, tractor, bailiff, and a strong police contingent ended. 20 predominantly concrete houses lay in ruins as their bewildered owners looked on in disbelief. This is a complete surprise. We got no warning or anything, so it is like we were ambushed. A tearful woman lamented, adding that they were not even given a chance to secure their belongings. A lot of sweat, tears, and partner money got bulldozed this morning by these wicked and uncaring people. According to the residents, at around 3 a.m., a police team entered the community and detained more than 20 men, whisking them away from the community without explanation. Shortly after, they heard the rumbling sounds of the bulldozers signaling the start of the demolition. The only mercy the demolition crew showed me was to allow me to go back into the house to pick up my baby, a female resident told the Gleaner. Right now, I am totally confused because I have nowhere to go. I feel like they have ripped away my life. Efforts by the Gleaner to speak with the bailiff to ascertain the reasons behind the demolition and who provided the authorization proved futile as he ignored all the questions that were asked of him. Now, this is the media talking to him, and they should be held accountable, but they don't want to answer questions. Neither do they have to do it because we no longer live in a free society. The police on location also refused to answer any questions. According to the affected residents, some of whom said they had been living on the property for more than 30 years, while they recognized that they had no legal claim to the property, they were unclear as to its true ownership. And that is what we're here to discuss. Who owns our land? Is it the Crown? Is it the government? We don't know. We see all of these lands in the Caribbean and we're wondering who owns them, but we see the government is selling up all of these lands to private investors, and we really want to know who owns the land. The people, the government, the Crown? Okay, we have to discuss this very important question this afternoon. In 2009, a gentleman showed up claiming ownership of the property and took us to court, but the matter was not resolved and we were not given any new court date. This morning marks the first time we were molested by anyone since that time, one of the long-standing residents told the Gleaner. Councillor Garth Wilkinson decried the demolition exercise. This is inhumane, and he's correct. The person behind this should have had dialogue with the people first so that they would have known if the land is up for sale, which would have given them an opportunity to buy their respective plots, said Wilkinson. Businessman Dennis Meadows, the People's National Party caretaker for Trelawney Northern, also took issue with the demolition while acknowledging, and we have to understand that, some of our people can be very, very belligerent, but we understand that the government needs to enforce law and order. And if they had already given the people notice, the proper notification, particularly through their MP, their MP should have, approached them and should have said what the government, what stipulations they had, how much time they had to vacate or to, get off the land. But nothing of that sort took place. While acknowledging that the legality of the action may ultimately have to be determined through the appropriate legal processes, he stressed that the humanitarian impact on the affected families could not be overlooked. The question I would like to ask is, our legal system, has it been bought and sold? Do we even have justice here in the region? Regardless of the legal issues involved, today's event has left several Jamaican families displaced, he said, adding that the elected representative has a duty to ensure that those affected receive their treatment at the necessary assistance. But yeah, she has that right to do that, but she also should have represented them by telling them what was up in terms of that the police and these people would have gone to their homes, right, 3 a.m. in the morning to demolish their homes. That is when people are sleeping, right? 3 a.m. Think about, you're in your neighborhood, you're being in your neighborhood, and the police and some private enterprise, some private corporation came and started bulldozing all the homes in your neighborhood. That is alarming. Now, Trelawney Northern Member of Parliament, Tova Hamilton, who has also visited the site, promised assistance for the affected families. Meanwhile, the occupants of 40 houses left standing on the property are now uneasy as they were warned by the demolition team that it would return to complete the exercise and clear the entire property. Right? The entire property. So it means, therefore, that they are not in any way, am I on screen still? Yeah, they are not in any way, they don't care. We are at a point where these people no longer care what they're doing. In fact, they're clamping down on what they are doing. Let's look at some of the situation that is happening there. Why am I, not being seen correctly on the screen? Let me look at some of the facts. So let's get into some of the facts here. And please like the live and share it so that because this is a very important live that we're discussing, because we are talking about justice in the Caribbean. And it seems like every day justice is being disposed of. All right, so let me get this on the screen. Hello, can you hear me, guys? Am I being heard? Hello, can you hear me? Okay, let me see here. My screen seems to be, can you hear me well? Okay. Give me 2 seconds. Let me get this to be, I don't know why this has just frozen up on my screen. Can you hear me well, guys? Let me just take this off this here. My entire computer is frozen. Yeah, let me get this. Okay, let me see if I can get this off the screen. Okay. All right. So let's get this off the screen. Wow. Okay, I'm back. Hopefully, thank you so much for waiting for me. It's what a sort of thing is going on this afternoon. All right, let's look at the news and get back to the situation here. All right, let me get the facts on the screen. Sorry about that. I was having some terrible problems here with the computer. So let's get the thing on the screen. Yeah. I might have to close some of the windows here because it's really messing up everything here this afternoon. So I might have to close some of these things. All right, let's see if we can look at what is happening.
Ben Trelawney earlier on Tuesday. That's according to Member of Parliament for North Trelawney, Tova Hamilton. More than 30 households have been displaced. Khaleesi Wright reports.
Several families in Cooper's Pen are now homeless. In the wee hours of Tuesday morning, their homes became a rubble as a tractor demolished the structures. In videos circulating on social media, household items including beds, fans, and stoves are seen scattered across the area. Member of Parliament for the area, Tova Hamilton, says over 30 households were displaced with no prior notice.
Nobody was aware. They came at 3 o'clock in the morning and displaced more than, so far I have about 32 households, including 3-day-old babies and other young infants, 11 months old. And we have some elderly here as well, displaced, have nowhere to sleep tonight. If notice was given prior, then at least I would have been aware. We could have tried to assist the residents in either storing the items or something, but nothing was given.
Nationwide News understands the occupants were on the land illegally. Hamilton says documents show that the land is owned by New Falmouth Resorts Limited.
We still don't know who did it. A lot of people will be displaced tonight, have nowhere to live, so we're just trying to see how best we can help them. What I'm aware of is that the land is owned by New Falmouth Resorts Limited. That's the name that's on the certificate of title. That much I do know because I pulled that down from the NLA website this morning. What is also on it is a caveat that was lodged by the Minister of Housing in 2012 claiming equitable interest in the property. I was told that there was an order from the court that was recently granted that was used to do the demolition today. I have a copy of the order. It is not a demolition order, but a demolition exercise was done today without giving persons any notice of this exercise taking place this morning.
MP Hamilton says the government is making arrangements to put temporary relief efforts in place for displaced families.
What I would love is for the private sector entity that did the demolition this morning to compensate the people for all of the damage that was done so that the people can at least find somewhere else to go. But before that can happen, because we still don't know who did it, I've requested assistance from the government, Minister of Housing. I called the Prime Minister this morning and they're sending some items that can help in the short term, tents, cots, things like that. Tarpaulins. I've provided some tarpaulins already too, so that people can at least secure what they have. But we will need a lot more assistance for what is happening here. So I know that we're going to try to have an intervention somehow, but we have to get more information before we can say anything more.
Khaleesi Wright for Nationwide.
Now, it's a very interesting sort of story coming out because, we're talking about justice tonight, and the fact of the matter, Caribbean people seem not to have any justice. Now, how is it that the member of parliament who represents the people, she's a politician, and she does not know what really happened, right? And she represents those people, that the police, along with a private enterprise, decided that they would go into a community right there and demolish people's homes. And then she's talking about reparations or, getting them housed after the fact, after they've lost everything. So are they going to give them back everything that they've lost, their stove, their furniture, everything that they've bought? Some of them have been living there for the last 30 years. And there was no form of communication that was given to the people so that at least they could have some form of preparation. And they're coming at 3 a.m. in the morning when people are most vulnerable, where, for example, the neighborhood could have been also very, people scared, right? It's not properly secured. Who wants to vacate their home at 3 a.m. in the morning and to be outside? So the government, well, they're saying the government is claiming that it has nothing to do with it. At the same time, the police were involved. So we're asking the question, if an arm of the state, which is the police, were involved in the demolition campaign or whatever they were doing, why is it therefore that the government was clueless as to what happened? Is the government lying? Is the government of Jamaica lying that it had no idea that these people were going there to, demolish people's homes? And this is where we are now looking at. We're seeing how government overstretched. The way in which government is behaving nowadays is not on the side of the people. And I was reading something today also coming out of Jamaica where they're suggesting that due to the drought conditions, that if the government sees you wasting water, using it to water your garden, that you can also be jailed. They can send you to prison. Right? This is how the government is becoming draconic in the region. And I really wonder if our Caribbean citizens are realizing that we're not living in a free space. I wonder if you understand that government is no longer representing you, that it's representing private, sector and private corporations. But they will lie through their teeth and they will tell you that they weren't aware of what was happening, and then you have nothing. You have no safeguard against anything. And this is where we're not taking our government seriously. We think that they are representing us, the people, when they're not. They're representing a corporate structure, a corporate entity, and that is why private investors, foreign investors, are whom they are giving everything to, and they'll give all the rights and take away your rights. And that is why this discussion is important today. Let me see what you're saying. Well, nobody is saying anything. It's like you're not interested in the topic, are you? Now, today we're looking at also the CCJ versus the Privy Council. In light of what I just wanted to bring some awareness to what is happening in Jamaica, because that is pretty much what is going to happen in the future in terms of the government taking over your homes. They're talking about sustainability, and you must understand very soon the government will have the rights through UN laws to just come and bulldoze down your home and do whatever it wants to do with it, whatever investment, because they're talking about sustainability and they have to protect the environment, and they will take it away in there to do whatever they think they want to do. Now, when I originally chose the topic for today's live, I wanted to examine the CCJ versus the Privy Council through the broader questions of corruption, power, and accountability. But yesterday, something as we happened in Jamaica, which I had to pivot to. Homes were demolished at dawn, and now questions are being raised about who was behind those demolitions and what authority was being exercised and what role the police actually played in our society. So we are becoming now a police society, a police state, because if the police can just go and evict you without any sort of a warrant and no notice at all, it means therefore that we are heading in a very scary direction. And this brings us directly back to the question at the heart of tonight's discussion. When ordinary citizens find themselves confronting powerful interests and institutions, who protects them? And where does accountability begin and where does it end? When ordinary people, homes, right, can be demolished at dawn, where does the ordinary citizen turn for justice? And does the Caribbean's highest court provide a better avenue for protecting citizens' rights than the Privy Council? Because we're hearing now that we need to go to the Caribbean Court of Justice, and that should be our final court of appeal. But what we're suggesting and what we're seeing in the Caribbean, you have to question, because our institutions are not working. Government is not working, right? The judiciary system is not working. The economic system is not working. So how are we going to trust the Caribbean Court of Justice as our final court of appeal when nothing in the Caribbean works? And it's not working in the interest of the ordinary man. But we always have this sort of utopic idea that if even though something is not working, everything is not working, but perhaps this one will work. I mean, how will it work when we're seeing a history of institutions that are broken and that are dysfunctional? how is it that the Caribbean Court of Justice is going to work? It's not going to work. Why? Because the same politicians, the same government structure, the same system in which our economy, in which our politics function, is the same system in which our judiciary is going to function. And they're not here to represent the ordinary man and woman. So I am not necessarily saying that I'm pro the Privy Council. I am not. What I think we need to think about is that we need to have options. And that is what we need to have. We need to be able to have options and not suggest that one system that is already diseased, which is our Caribbean system, the institutions are not working on our behalf, then how can we trust it as the final court of appeal? Now, that allows, what happened at the demolitions. We're looking at what really happened at the demolitions. We're seeing where people went there and they bulldozed people's homes. Now, where can these people go for justice? That's the question we need to ask. Where are they going to go for justice? And one of the things that really alarms me here in the Caribbean is that people don't care. You don't care too. Many of us here, we don't care what happened, because until it happens to us, we don't have any empathy, right? We don't have any empathy because we're so politically charged that all we want to do is to defend the politician that is in government or the opposition side. All right, we don't want to look at things, critically and objectively, saying that it could be me. And when it reaches me, what am I going to do? When the police comes for me, and you might say, well, I'm on a land that is mine, right, that I've inherited, that I've paid for, I'm paying my mortgage, I own the land, but I'm telling you, laws are changing right now. And in the name of sustainability and Agenda 230, very soon, they're also coming for your land. Okay? They're going to come for your land. Now, what legal rights do homeowners and occupants have? That's the question we need to ask. What legal rights do homeowners and occupants have? We must discuss this very important question. And who authorized the demolitions under what legal authority? The government is suggesting that it did not, and that it was a private company, yet still we see that the police, an arm of the state, was used to actually go and demolish the people's homes. Now, what avenues of appeal or judicial review are available, and what role does the Jamaican court system play in this sort of situation? Now, it doesn't seem like you're very interested in the topic. Am I wasting my time on the topic? Or your mind is somewhere else? I thought that something like this would be something you would want to talk about, because it is something that is appropriate, something that is going to affect all of us, whether you're in the Caribbean or you're in the world. People are already talking about their farms being actually demolished in Europe, even during the pandemic. And you're just there looking as if you don't even care about what happened in that neck of the woods, right? You don't need to care, do you? Because it's not affecting you yet. But when it comes on to the whole change of the legal infrastructure, you are going to see that is going to affect you. Now, the Caribbean has spent decades debating whether we should replace Britain's Privy Council with our own Caribbean Court of Justice. But there's a question we don't ask often enough. If the CCJ is to be our final court of appeal, who holds the judges themselves accountable? That's what we need to ask. And this afternoon, we're going beyond the usual debate about colonialism and sovereignty. We are examining the structure of the CCJ. Now, we like to talk about slavery and colonialism, but we don't realize that we're still living in that era. The only difference is that our current Black people that you love so dearly are the ones who are the helm of things, and they're the ones exploiting you and will send you right back to the plantation. So look at the white people and what they're doing, and don't look at what your own people, whether they're Indians or Blacks or Chinese, are doing in the region, and you are going right back on the plantation where you smile. Now, we're examining the structure of the CCJ, the criticisms and allegations surrounding it, the appointment of its judges, and whether the appointment of its judges, and whether the Caribbean has actually created a more accountable judicial system, or simply replaced one institution with another. Is the CCJ the same as the Privy Council? For example, we learned that there is an appellate judge who is from Nigeria on the courts, in CCJ. Now, why are we having a Nigerian as a judge on the Caribbean Court of Justice? Is that funny? Should we have a Nigerian, or should we have all Caribbean judges? We need to ask ourselves these questions. And why have they placed a Nigerian citizen on the court? Is it also tied up with the Commonwealth, or is it that it's just business as usual? And it's not any way to free us and to give us an independent appellate court in the Caribbean? These are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. Okay, you don't seem to be interested. Well, perhaps I'm not going to be interested myself. Okay, so I can wrap up and get off the live right now. We have no protection whatsoever, no police, legal, economic protection. But do we care? Right? Do we care? And I think that if we just sit down and we don't discuss matters like this, how are we going to have it? You think it's going to come magically, where you're going to get a politician and they're going to come? Discussions like these, you don't want to be engaged in intellectual discourses. You want to engage in nonsense, and then you think the government is going to do what you want them to do. It doesn't work like that. Whether it's in the United States, you have to fight for what you need to fight for. And we're not in the Caribbean here. We have given up. We have given up. It's sad to say, but we have literally given up. And at this point in time, I think that we just have to allow the government to win. Right? So yeah. So that's what I had to say today. I'm not going to stay with you. You have no interest in the topic. So you decide where your rights and your future will be. All the best to you. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll have another one tomorrow. Bye-bye.